Well, why don't we begin and we'll let people in as they come. Thank you for coming out, by the way. It's a cold winter night here in Ottawa, and what better thing to do than to sit by each and talk about what will become of us. So, this is a presentation by Conservation Bureau Ottawa. There's a bunch of us here in the room, and we're working very, very hard to see if we can bring our dream of a green burial site to Ottawa. We exist in the larger place of Community Death Care Ottawa, which has been rolling for quite a few years here and now in Ottawa, providing support and education and good humanity to all those in Ottawa. So we're here tonight to have a little talk about disposition, what will become of us. What shall we do with these good bodies of ours once we are finished here on this mortal coil? And so we have a speaker tonight. We have Kelly Butler coming to speak. She'll do a little presentation, then I'm going to ask Nancy to speak a little bit more about Conservation Burial Ottawa so you get a real idea of what our dream is and how you might see yourself in that dream too. And then we'll certainly take questions after Kelly's speech. So feel free to put anything into the chat. When Kelly is finished, we'll open up microphones too. So you're welcome to put your voices in the room. But just a deep appreciation of your willingness to come and keep us good company on such a cold night. So thank you. Let me first introduce Kelly Butler, who is the founder of Community Death Care Ottawa. We are thankful for her willingness to step in and provide such a good support to Ottawa and environs. But perhaps you don't also know that Kelly is teaching some courses now, some doula courses, and I'm lucky enough to be in one of the first cohorts of this course, and it's a really remarkable possibility. I feel that she's tending to death doulas, of course, and that possibility in Ottawa and beyond. But perhaps I could say more importantly, she's bringing these practices back to all of us. It's not so long ago that we were tending to our people in our homes, and perhaps that's still in our bones. And Kelly's really, I think, revealing all of that to us as we go through the course. So I highly recommend you keep that in mind. I think the next one might be September, but we'll ask her. But for the time being, let's hear from you, Kelly, tonight, and thank you for being willing to give us your time.
Thank you, Anne. I'm so glad to be here, and I'm so glad to see your good faces. I'm in Chelsea this evening, and along the banks of the frozen Gatineau River, part of the unceded territory of the Anishinaabe people. I always just feel so blessed to live and work and play in this place. I also really appreciate that Ottawa is the meeting place of three rivers. I think often of the fact that this was always a place of coming together, a place of people meeting each other. And that's one of the things that really interests me when we're talking about death care. When the dying time is happening, when a death occurs, it is a place that we have always come together. And we've worked alongside one another to tend to our beloved dead. And part of that tending is, what do we do with the body? So tonight's topic, what becomes of us, I wanted to start with giving you some information about what are the options that are available. Because what I find is that it's a thing we don't tend to think about until the moment of need, as we call it in the funeral industry. Time of need is when death occurs. And if we are wanting to consider our choices and reflect on them and wonder about what would be best for our family, for ourselves, for our legacy, once the death has actually happened, it's kind of short notice. You know, as they say, learning how to swim after you've fallen overboard is not the best timing. So it's a little bit of the intention behind offering these talks, just to let you know what's possible and maybe clear up some misconceptions. That's the other thing that I encounter is sometimes there's a bit of misunderstanding about what's available and what's just being talked about on social media. So I do have a PowerPoint presentation to give us a little grounding. And feel free to jump in with questions as we're going. We're very informal here tonight. If I'm speaking about something and you're stuck on, gosh, I don't really know what that means, or I have something else that I want to know, I welcome you to just unmute yourself or put something in the chat. But we are going to have time at the end as well for questions. So I'll let you use your own judgment about whether it's a burning query or whether it can wait. What will become of us, as Anne says, it is literally the question of what is going to happen to our body after we've died, because we need to do something with the corpse, with the body. Disposition is the official term for what happens to the body after death. We think about the disposition of our possessions, but there is also the disposition of the body. And how we handle the physical remains after death, it is the legal and practical process of laying the body to rest or the care of the remains. We have always had at least a couple of choices, often burial or cremation, but demand for more environmentally responsible options in recent years is really changing the landscape. That's partly why we feel there is a need now to have these conversations. 50, 60 years ago, you would have just probably been buried in the church cemetery or whatever your family always did. We just followed the template of what our people had done before us. But now we are presented with different options, and we have this ability to choose. Regardless of what form of disposition is chosen, the options for the family still include gathering together, spending time with the body, perhaps hosting a wake or visitation, conducting a funeral service, a memorial, and whether that is with or without the body. So I just want to underscore that the things that lead up to the disposition might be the same for all of these different things that we're talking about. None of them preclude having a funeral or gathering together at a community center or in the backyard. All of that is still possible. Can everybody see the screen? Good. Okay, great. So I want you to hold in your mind the fact that there are at least 3 things that you might be thinking about when considering your choice for end of life disposition. One would be, what are your wishes or the wishes of your family? What would be comforting to your family members? What represents your legacy, what you were sort of about? What is the cultural need that might be met? For example, cremation is very traditional for some cultures. In other instances, burial would be more typical. And so that is part of the consideration. I do encounter people that have a strong desire for what it is that they want for themselves, but I would remind us that this is for the people we leave behind. Including them in that consideration is really important. The next thing to think about is what is legal and available in our region. We hear about a lot of different things. It doesn't mean that it's allowed in whatever jurisdiction you're in, and it may not be available. So I'm going to pause there to say there is one kind of disposition I'm going to talk about, and that is human composting, that is not available here, but I get so many questions about it. I wanted to give you some information. What would be legal in Ottawa would be a burial at sea, but it's not available. So I'm not going to talk about that tonight. I really do want to focus on what is potentially would be a possibility here, just to give you a sense of what's guiding the information that I want to share with you. And then another piece that I think is worth thinking about is, what are the consequences of our choices? And I mean that in the sense of, what is the lasting impact? What is it that we are perhaps weaving together? Is the way we're tending to our death bringing together threads of community and relationship? Is it good for the earth? Are we feeding life with our death? And so that becomes some of the philosophical wondering that is a really oftentimes neglected piece of this conversation, but important. So the things that we're going to talk about tonight, there are options for disposition: conventional burial, natural burial, cremation. Those three you've probably heard of. Alkaline hydrolysis, that might be new to some of you, sometimes called water cremation or aquamation. Donation, donating our body to science, and organic reduction or human composting. So those are the particular types of disposition that I'm going to speak about. The first option, one I'm sure that we all know and would recognize, is conventional burial. Sometimes people will say traditional burial, and I don't care to use that term, because if we're talking traditional and we mean what our forefathers and foremothers 100 years ago were doing, that actually looks a lot more like natural burial than what we do right now. I prefer the term conventional burial. A death would occur, and typically the deceased would be transferred to a funeral home, and the body would be prepared. You know, in this particular piece would be similar for many of these different options, but that preparation being washing and dressing, but there may be the inclusion of embalming. Embalming is when the fluids of the body are drained and replaced with chemicals that help to preserve the body, or more specifically, slow decay, slow the natural biological processes that would break the body down into its components. So embalming is not required by law. In Ontario, cemeteries and funeral homes are governed by the Bereavement Authority of Ontario. That's the BAO. So they set out the regulations and the rules that we all have to follow. Funeral homes and cemeteries have their own rules and bylaws. When somebody says, no, we can't do that, there's a rule against it, be mindful that they might mean this is one of the rules of our business and not a rule or regulation of the province. So most funeral homes would tell you that there is a rule that somebody has to be embalmed if there's going to be visitation, if you're planning to have a viewing. Embalming is not necessary for any reason, but a funeral home may have that requirement because they want the person to look a certain way if the public is viewing the person. The deceased is then placed in a casket, which could be made of wood, it could be made of metal, it could be made of a variety of materials. And those choices are made by the family depending on personal preference and budget. And perhaps there's going to be a service. After that takes place, the body is taken to a cemetery and then buried in a designated plot. So we are talking about, along with conventional burial, we're talking about then a conventional cemetery. And what I mean by that is a cemetery that is formally designed and maintained as a burial ground intended for these conventional practices. It could still include, say, a church graveyard, but very often that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing these big cemeteries. They often include a lot of lawn, and they're very managed spaces. They have those manicured lawns, they have paved roads, they have defined pathways of where we can go and where we're not supposed to go. The burial plots are clearly marked, and things are arranged in very orderly sections. That setting can be quite park-like, with trees, with shrubs, with benches. There may be memorial features that invite visitors to pause, to spend some time in the cemetery, and they're generally aiming to create a very respectful environment. I have certainly been in very beautiful park-like conventional cemeteries, and I have been in those cemeteries that feel very sterile, that really are designed for the sake of the riding mower and not necessarily the humans that might be there. The burial plots that are in a conventional cemetery are designated for casketed remains generally. So again, I'm going to pause there and say the BAO, the Bereavement Authority of Ontario, they allow for shrouded burials. You are allowed under Ontario law to be buried in a shroud. But a lot of times, conventional cemeteries have a bylaw against it. They will demand that the person is buried in a casket. There may be a requirement for the use of a burial vault or a grave liner. Those are generally made of concrete or other composite materials. The reason they ask for that is to keep the ground level. That liner keeps everything stable. It keeps the earth from falling in as decomposition happens. And again, it's both for a visual aesthetic, but it's also so the riding mower can run very easily over the surface and not be dealing with valleys and such. The demands for ongoing maintenance are real. Those are legitimate concerns, but that's a place where you can maybe pause and wonder, is that something that matters to me and to my family? What am I contributing to? This is, again, part of why we're wanting to have this discussion. A conventional cemetery will also generally have grave markers, and those will be standardized. It may be that you have to have an upright headstone made out of a certain material. It may be that you have to have a flat plaque placed in the earth, which again is so that we can take the riding mower without any interruption. So every cemetery is going to have its own rules. These monuments are often made of granite, and they include identifying information for the person who's buried there, their name, when they died, sometimes a little phrase. This is a place that's professionally maintained. There's regular lawn care, landscaping, infrastructure, and there are things like assistance in choosing a plot, record keeping, perpetual care. If we've traveled and visited places where there are such things as abandoned cemeteries, and we have these places that are being taken over again by nature, you might not know where somebody is buried. And if you go to one of these conventional cemeteries, there's probably an office or there's a person you can call, and you can get very exact detail about where a person is buried. So that's one style. We also have natural burial. And this is a photo from Larkspur, which is a conservation burial site in Tennessee. I invite you to look at their photos. They're staggeringly beautiful. The absolute devotion with which they tend to the dead. I find their work very inspiring. Natural burial is sometimes called green burial. It's very much part of the death care movement. This goes hand in hand with wanting to have more family-led care. With natural burial, the body is placed directly into the earth, generally in a shroud or a simple casket, something that's biodegradable, and the person is allowed to decompose naturally on its own timeline. We're not hurrying things along. There's no special technology, no processing, and minimal disturbance, both to the body and the surrounding landscape. It's a very, what I'd call a low intervention way of dealing with the deceased, and nature does a lot of the work. This approach to disposition, to death care, is safe, it's legal, it supports the long-term health of the planet. And as I said at the start, I don't call conventional burial traditional burial because we have this idea that natural burial is part of a modern movement. But in fact, natural burial is our oldest practice as humans, returning our dead directly to the earth and allowing nature to do what it has always done, which is to transform, renew, and sustain life through these practices. There's an idea that it's something new, but in fact, this is a very old practice. And it avoids things like embalming, it avoids the concrete vaults, it avoids non-biodegradable containers. And so that can be things like the glue and the varnish used to make a casket. The person is generally, we would expect them to be dressed in biodegradable fabrics as well, so cotton or linen, those kinds of things. And the body is allowed to return to the soil and become part of the organic matter of the earth. And when we take away the things that slow down the process, like these grave liners or preserving the body, when we take those things away, the natural process of decay and returning to the earth unfold, I would say, gently and respectfully, and in a fashion that is sustainable. This is something that will continue to be available to us and continues to renew the earth. As I say, sometimes this is called green burial, but I prefer the term natural burial because for me conveys the intention of returning to the earth in this very simple and unimpeded way. So when we talk about natural burial, we can also consider three different categories. We have, first of all, hybrid, and then we have what we would call natural or a green cemetery, and then we also have conservation burial. The difference between those three things. In Ontario right now, all of the natural burial sites are hybrid cemeteries. A hybrid cemetery is a place where there is both conventional and natural burial existing in the same space. They might be designated areas, but this in part is because all of the natural burial sites that currently exist were added to an existing conventional burial cemetery. And so it's not because we want to make sure that people have choice. It's because to create a natural burial site, to create a cemetery is a lot of work. And to join something that already exists is administratively and cost-wise a little easier to do. A natural burial cemetery, and whether that's part of an existing cemetery as a hybrid cemetery or whether it's standalone, a natural burial cemetery follows the 5 principles that have been established by the Green Burial Council of Canada. So that is a guiding body more than a governing body. These principles emphasize simplicity, sustainability, and respect for the natural cycle of life and death. Some of those principles would include no embalming, that burial is direct into the earth using natural fibers or materials like a cotton shroud or a pine box. There are no concrete vaults or liners. Basically, nothing that separates the body from the surrounding earth other than the casket or the shroud. The place of burial is restored using native plants, things that would be indigenous to that area. And so again, this return to the ecosystem that would be found in that place. Memorialization is kept to a minimum. Sometimes there's no marker that's allowed and it's just that you have the GPS coordinates. But sometimes it could be, depending on the place, a simple wooden or stone marker. Sometimes a particular, you may plant a tree to mark the place. We're not doing the big granite headstones. So these cemeteries are designed or created with deliberate intention for sustainability and efficient land use. So that's hybrid burial, hybrid natural burial, conservation burial. You heard Anne at the start, that we are here on behalf of Conservation Burial Ottawa. So how is that different from natural burial? I consider it the gold standard of natural burial. If you go to our website, you'll see that we describe it the greenest of the green. Conservation burial extends the tenets of natural burial, and it pairs environmentally responsible burial with permanent land protection. That's one of the key differences. There is an eye on long-term stewardship of the land when we're talking about conservation burial. Some things include, and you might find these at a natural burial site as well, but the graves are very often hand dug. They're to a shallow depth, no more than 4 feet. This is to help encourage decomposition. No headstones would be allowed. So even for natural burial, that maybe there's a stone marker or a wooden plaque or something, nothing is used to mark the grave at a conservation burial site. And over time, these places become sanctuaries for plants, for wildlife, the living world. Conservation burial can offer a very meaningful legacy. It is a way of honoring life with our death. It's a way of feeding life with our death and caring for the earth so that it sustains all beings on this planet. Cremation is another option that you probably are aware of. It wasn't a common choice, certainly 100 years ago. It was not part of Western culture. Alkaline hydrolysis is experiencing the same resistance right now. But, you know, we would have buried people. Cremation was sort of a new thing. We don't like new things when it comes to death. But this form of disposition is when we reduce the body to its basic elements through intense heat, specifically through flame. The process takes place at a crematorium, unless you live in a particular town in Colorado. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Where they actually allow an outdoor pyre. If you don't live in that town, you will be at a crematorium, and there's a chamber, or the retort, it's called, where the deceased is, and they have to be in a rigid container. So that can be a cardboard box, that can be a wood casket, but it would not include a shroud. They are in a combustible container. Generally, it's a casket, and they are placed into the retort, and the body is reduced through the element of fire. One of the considerations with cremation is particular medical devices, like a pacemaker has to be removed. And so a lot of what we talk about are things, let me rephrase that or say that more properly. When we're talking about family-led care, it includes things like caring for the body. It can include burial, transporting the body, but you cannot DIY your own cremation. And if there's something like removing a pacemaker, you're going to have a funeral director involved. We can still look after our own beloved dead, and that would be for another talk. But just for your own knowing, the temperature is generally somewhere between 7,600 and 1,760 and 1,000 degrees Celsius. Basically, any soft tissue is vaporized. The organic matter that we are is consumed by the flame, with the exception of the bones. The bones are left. And so when we receive cremated remains, that is in fact ground up bone. The crematorium operator retrieves the bones after the cremation is finished, and that takes around 3 hours. It depends on things like the exact temperature, the size of the body, you know, the particular equipment that they're using. But the chamber cools down, those remaining bone fragments are gathered, and then they're processed in what's called a cremulator. And this essentially grinds up the remaining bone, and we receive back what seems somewhat like a coarse sand called ash. We'll say our loved one's ashes, but in fact, it is the pulverized bone that we're receiving. And then what happens with the ashes after that is left to the family. You know, they can be scattered, they can be buried, you know, they can go on the mantle. That's another decision that needs to be made. Alkaline hydrolysis is a new offering. It's something that we've done for a long time for livestock. The technology itself isn't new, but offering it for human disposition is new. It's sometimes called aquamation. It's sometimes called water cremation. In Ontario, the Bereavement Authority Board, as mentioned, the BAO requires us to call it alkaline hydrolysis. It uses a mixture of water and potassium hydroxide, so it's an alkaline solution, and heat. That solution and heat are used to accelerate decomposition of the body. That very high pH along with that temperature, it's like a pressure cooker. It breaks down the organic tissues into their chemical components. So the body is broken down into amino acids, soap, sugars, salts. This is the stuff we're made of. And it happens within 3 to 16 hours. That time frame is going to depend on things like the size of the person, the particular temperature that's being used. Some funeral directors don't like alkaline hydrolysis for that reason, that you can't hurry up the process. With a cremation, you can actually turn up the flame if it's really busy and you have a lot of bodies that you need to tend to. Alkaline hydrolysis takes as long as it takes. Similar to cremation, what we're left with are calcium phosphate. The bone fragments are left behind. Those are not completely, consumed in that process. And they too are processed or pulverized and then returned to the family. The effluent, the liquid that remains, is nutrient rich and sterile, and it generally goes down the drain into the sanitation system. For people who feel squeamish about that, my response is that funeral homes are already doing this when they're embalming. When they are draining the body of fluids, those go down the drain as well. So this is something we maybe don't know about, but this is the practice. And the other thing that I would say, again, if you feel troubled by it, there are lots of things that go into the sanitation system that maybe you feel squeamish about, but this is what the system is designed to do. So for people that say this is a problem because we shouldn't be adding this into the sewer, it actually doesn't cause any harm in that regard. This is legal in Ontario. It's not legal everywhere in Canada, but it's legal here in Ontario. It's also legal in Quebec. It's not necessarily common because there is the infrastructure that's required is no small thing. And so there are certainly locations in Toronto, Peterborough, I think Guelph. There's a location in Arnprior. I suspect that this will become more common because it uses far less energy than flame cremation. If you're concerned about fossil fuels and what it takes to cremate a body, alkaline hydrolysis has a much lower energy use. There are still concerns about, the water usage, what we might be exposed to in terms of pathogens, but some of the concerns are justified, some not so much. For example, the high pH and the water temperature both do the good job of killing any pathogens. It is not risky in that regard. Another reason this might be preferred to flame cremation is because there's no need for a casket or a container. The person is put directly into the chamber, wearing generally a gown or something. And so it also would not include embalming. And along with the fact that less energy is used, if there are any implants, things like mercury and replacement joints can be reclaimed after this process. That's not the case with flame cremation, but alkaline hydrolysis, if like I've got 2 hips replaced, those would actually be intact after this process. And so that's another reason that sometimes people think that it's what they would choose for themselves. I want to make note of the fact I'm aware of several funeral homes that are saying that this is the best choice available, that it's even better than natural burial when we're talking about environmental impact. That statement is being made based on misrepresenting a report that comes out of the Netherlands. In all cases, they're quoting the same source material. And that source material, which I've gone back to read the study because it seemed a little absurd to me that something that requires the mining of potash, that requires all of this equipment that we see, that it could somehow be better than natural burial. So I did go back and read the report that gets quoted, and the report says no such thing. Natural burial isn't even mentioned in the report. So there is no comparison that's been made in that regard. That's just to flag the fact that if somebody tells you that, you can tell them that that is incorrect, or you can send them my way, and I will tell them that that is incorrect. I think this is a great development relative to if having remains, that you can have in an urn is important to you. I think this is a really good choice. Another thing that people choose and is legal is donation to science. And I think that this is a thing to keep in mind, that it is one of the options. It can be a very generous and meaningful decision to donate our bodies to science. This is whole body donation. It contributes to medical education and research. I think this is a really beautiful choice. It's important, if this is something you want, that folks remember there are certain procedures in place, and that there are steps we have to take if this is what you want. It may not work out. There are reasons that they might say no to you. So I'll get into that a little bit. In Ottawa, it is the University of Ottawa that receives these bodies and manages the process. There are a few things that have to be considered. For one, this has to happen within 72 hours of the death. So you want to start early and let your family know that this is what you want. There are forms that you could fill out. That should, it would be advised that you would begin that before death has actually happened. The reason for that time frame is because the body needs to be preserved in a condition that will be suitable for future study. If decomposition has begun, they won't be able to accept that body. Your next of kin need to know about this as well, because even if that's your wish, the executor needs to give the okay for this to happen. You need to work with a funeral home on this. Some of these options that I'm talking about, families can really be very involved with the process, including, that you can actually take a body to a crematorium yourself. But the University of Ottawa is not going to deal with you directly. And so this is, again, the institution itself has its own rules, and they will deal with the funeral home, but they won't deal with the family directly. So knowing that these arrangements should be made early enough that the possibility is there, making these arrangements to have the body transported, making sure all the paperwork is filled out. You should also know that the family will be responsible for the expenses that the funeral home incurs around paperwork and transporting the body. Sometimes people think they can do this and there's no cost. The university, when they're finished with their research, with their study, those remains will be cremated, and then they have a collective memorial, I think once a year, for all the people they're honoring and offering their gratitude for this, again, very generous gift. That part the family doesn't pay for, but there are some upfront expenses of getting the person to the university. Some of the reasons that they might refuse a body, there can be medical, legal, and practical reasons that they cannot accept your gift. It can be things like if the body has already declined significantly, that may be a contagious disease that the person has had. It could be death from a trauma. So there's a lot of damage to the body, a death by suicide. A body that has undergone a full autopsy would not be accepted. Likewise, if organs have been donated, this is, again, whole body donation. If you want to donate parts of yourself to be a donor to someone who's still alive, that I think is also a beautiful choice, but it would preclude donating your remains to science. The exception is if your corneous eye donation is possible, and then you can still donate the rest of your body to science. There can also just be the issue of they have too many bodies already, that it can be just that practical consideration of they don't have any room. I know that has happened at various times, that they have a backlog of cadavers for research and aren't accepting any new ones. This is to say you need to plan in advance. And then I also did want to mention natural organic reduction, which is the one thing that is not out of this list. This is not available in Ottawa. This is called human composting, but people are hearing about it. I think there's a lot of talk on social media. And so I just wanted to let you know a little bit about it. The other reason I wanted to flag it is because, similar to alkaline hydrolysis, sometimes people think that this is like green burial, and it is not. It is an acceleration of the natural decomposition process. There are aspects about it that are green, as we say, but this does involve a very managed industrial process. And I don't think that's really communicated in the brochure. You can see in this image, this is from a place in Washington. And I think it's a fine choice. I don't want to give you the idea that I'm discrediting it, but people are placed in a container, generally a plastic container of sorts. They'll talk about the fact that you're laid on a layer of compost and alfalfa. It really is using the language of natural and the living world, but in reality, you will be in a vessel in a facility that is monitored with sensors, the material's aerated, energy use is definitely a big consideration. Your body is breaking down as it would in the earth, but it is an accelerated process. It can take 4 to 6 weeks. And at around that time, the bones can sometimes, the remains can sometimes be mechanically disturbed because they want to break up the bones. And at the end of around a month, bones still remain. Those can be collected, and much like cremation, much like alkaline hydrolysis, those bones can then be pulverized. And what some facilities do is they then return those pulverized bones to this organic material that's been created. After another 30 days or so, basically what you're left with is entirely organic material, soil. We end up with about a cubic meter of soil at the end of this process. So I think it's an interesting option that is not available to us here. My concern is around the energy and infrastructure usage necessary for this to be implemented on any significant scale. Depending on your particular region where you live, these options are going to make more sense or not, depending on, like, are you in a place that deals with drought? And so water usage is a huge no-no. Are you in a place that, there just isn't that much land available? And maybe something like human composting starts to make more sense. So this is why there's not kind of a one size fits all, but certainly I think for Ottawa, conservation burial would be a beautiful choice. I've stopped my screen share. I'm just noticing that it's almost 8. I talked for longer than I intended to. I'll turn it over to Nancy.
Okay, what maybe we could do is just pause here for a moment before Nancy comes in to speak about conservation burial, in case people have questions about what Kelly has just said. We'll have time to ask Kelly a few questions if you have any, and then we'll speak about conservation burial specifically here in Ottawa. Nancy will speak, and then we'll have questions about that too. So we've got lots of time to ask what you need to ask. I'm looking at the chat to see if there are any questions with regard to Kelly's presentation. Thank you, Kelly. That was both beautiful and rich with information. I'm wondering if anyone has a question for Kelly. Kaz, you were asking some things, and I wonder if you'd like to just unmute yourself and ask Kelly directly.
I don't seem to be able to put myself on camera, so.
Oh, that's okay. Your voice is what we're hoping to hear.
I guess as someone who works in the Ottawa Valley with green burial, there are so many options for people these days to choose for something that was once a more human endeavor that was understood. And I don't know if it's more of a question than a lament for these times when people have more choices. What does it mean to die in these times as a human being among your people? And I don't expect you, Kelly, to answer this. I'm grateful for your elaborate telling of all the options that are possible for us now. And it makes me so excruciatingly sad. That dying has these consumer choices. That we don't die unto our people. What would it take? What does it take to die among other humans who might know how to respond? Thank you for your dedications.
Thank you, Kaz.
Thank you.
Thank you for the lament. And I know I share that feeling of pain around where we find ourselves now. And I want to go back to the starting point that what are the things that we need to be thinking about when we're making these choices? And there can be our wishes, there can be what's legal, what's available, but then there is the third thing of, and what are the consequences of those choices? And I want to be clear that what we're attempting to do tonight is let you know what's out there, not because we're advocating for it, but it's to be informed will allow you to ask those good questions, will give you the opportunity to think about, as you've so beautifully said, Kaz, what is it to die unto our own people? What are we missing in the conventional way of approaching death right now, the modern way of approaching death? You know, it's absolutely the case that often these things are part of the consumer model. I didn't talk about the mushroom suit. I didn't talk about the tree urn.
Yeah.
Partly because those things don't work. They do nothing, but it's a thing that we can sell to the consumer. And so I would say, you know, one, we want to provide you with good information. But I want you to have that information so that you'll be savvy and know what's being put in front of you because it's profitable to somebody else. And what are we asking you to come back to? Which is, you know, let hands that knew you and loved you be the ones that tend you at your end. Let this be the work of the heart. And you're invited into that. And at the same time, not everyone has the capacity. For some traditions, cremation is culturally a really important option. And so we are not wanting to suggest that there's only one way, that there's only a single correct choice. But we want you to recognize that there are consequences to all this choice that's put in front of us. And I want to remind you that we left something on the table when we turned towards convenience. When we turned towards, gosh, this is really a bother, or it's upsetting. As a small anecdote, I did used to work in funeral homes, and I would help people pre-plan. So many times people would say, well, I don't want a service because I don't want my family to be upset. So no funeral for me. It was remarkable to me and so beautiful because nobody's died yet. So I could say to them that they're not going to be upset because of the funeral. They're going to be upset because you're dead. And where can they go with that? What other gathering are we going to create for them so that people can come together in their grief? So you're getting a little bit right now the philosophical underpinnings that drive us in this work. And we really want this to be some good information for you. There's going to be other things coming up in the months ahead that we can talk about this more. And I would love, this is a conversation maybe we can think about having this kind of wondering that Kaz is pointing us towards, that I would really love, that isn't simply, what are the kind of facts of the matter, but instead, what's the heart of the matter?
Beautifully said. Oh my.
Thank you.
This has brought us to our deep humility and humanity, hasn't it? Oh, thank you, Kaz. My goodness. I think it's wise. There's a couple of questions in the chat, but I think they are pointing more toward this conservation Ottawa idea. So perhaps it's good to now turn to Nancy, who's going to give us an idea of what this small, passionate group has been up to, and perhaps you'll tie your string to our kite too. Nancy.
Thank you, Anne. I will give a little bit of information about Conservation Burial Ottawa and who we are and what we're up to. We formed in 2022, and we came together through the Community Death Care Ottawa group that identified through Kelly a bunch of us who had expressed an interest in green, natural, or conservation burial. We realized there is no option in the geography of the city of Ottawa for a green burial. At the time we were meeting, back in 2022, there was absolutely no option. The closest ones were in Coburg, a green hybrid cemetery with another conventional cemetery. Picton had an option as well. And in the intervening years since 2022, we've also seen hybrid green cemeteries in Perth and in Pembroke. Still, there's nothing within the geography of the city of Ottawa. Okay, is that coming up for folks? This map? This is a map of the geography of the city of Ottawa. You can see, we are very large. The cities of Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver can all fit within the geography of the formal city of Ottawa. That's not Toronto GTA or Vancouver. It's just the proper Vancouver and Toronto. You can see just how big we are, about 2,800 square kilometers. And nowhere in here is there a current green cemetery. There are, however, and I need to mention this, both in the Muslim and Jewish faith, a sort of green burial tradition. But for someone who's not religiously involved, an Ottawa resident, currently within our geography, does not have a single green cemetery at our disposal. Our small group, there's sort of 5 core people who have been sticking with it. We began by writing our mission of what we were all about. We developed some materials and made this card, our calling card, and on the back we have our mission statement. We spent quite a bit of time also deciding what to name ourselves, and we ultimately landed on Conservation Burial Ottawa. The mission, as we describe it, is 4-pronged: sustaining connection, weaving people together with rituals to honor grief and celebrate the lives lived, recognizing diverse and spiritual, religious, and secular beliefs. We are honoring ecology, reducing the environmental harm of cremation and conventional cemetery practices by using organic material and green memorials. We are aiming for conservation of land, protecting green space and endangered habitats through sustainable burial practices, creating sanctuary for all, and a mindful. So the group came up with that, and then we decided we would we mapped out all of the local cemeteries within that geography. So I want to show you a second visual. Is it? I'm going to find it. Coming. Okay, gotta go back to the Zoom. Share. Okay, is this? You're seeing it? Okay. On here, what you're seeing is the geography of the city of Ottawa. All of the green are cemeteries that are private and church cemeteries, small family cemeteries in some of the rural areas. The blue dots are 16 City of Ottawa cemeteries. These City of Ottawa cemeteries are basically often heritage or abandoned closed church cemeteries. Whenever a cemetery is abandoned and the church closes, but the cemetery's still there, the care and maintenance of that cemetery falls to the city, the municipality. So the City of Ottawa, in fact, owns or has care and maintenance for 16 of those cemeteries you see scattered throughout this map. You can find this map on our website, and you can drill in and see in the legend which cemeteries are which and where they are located. So and we have this on a big display board that we bring out to community events. But this was one of our first big tasks as the Conservation Burial Ottawa group. From here, we went out and visited the cemeteries, focusing on the ones under the care of the municipality, to see if there were any that were suitable to resurrect as a natural green burial cemetery. None of them immediately jumped out at us, but we're revisiting some, and we're also exploring other underused cemeteries that you see on the map. We've been doing a lot of field trips the last couple of years. At the same time, we're doing community events, often in conjunction with Community Death Care Ottawa. We also held a very well-attended movie afternoon at a local library. The last couple of years, we've been conducting cemetery walks in local cemeteries led by a botany expert, Amber Westfall from the Wild Garden. Those have been very well attended and kind of also serve the purpose of bringing people into cemeteries with a whole different view of what is happening in a cemetery. So that's what we've been doing. What we're planning going forward in 2026 is we've kind of divided the work into focus areas, and I'll stop sharing that for now, into focus areas, and we've assigned leads to each. We have sort of 6 areas of focus. One is ecology, and that's connecting with environmental groups because we share a lot of goals with environmental groups around the impact of burial and death on the carbon footprint. So that's one focus area. Governance is another. We're moving toward becoming a formal board as opposed to a grassroots organization, which we are still right now. We're looking at charitable and nonprofit status going forward. We are reaching out and just beginning to see if there's a way we can partner with them, one of their already existing cemeteries that are underused. We've also reached out to the National Capital Commission because we share with them the goal of land conservation and protecting that beautiful green belt that wraps around Ottawa. We are also working on a focus on best practices, how others have developed green cemeteries in their community and how they administer them, so that we have all that information clearly mapped out. And lastly, we're continuing with our public education focus, trying to get our messages out in the media, more events, more movie afternoons, perhaps, outreach, communication materials. We're developing a template that we're hoping people can grab from us and use to contact their counselors to let them know, and others to let people know and raise awareness of the lack of green burial options in Ottawa, and let them know that it's something that people really do want. In closing, I guess I'd just say I'd encourage you to go to our webpage. It's conservationburialottawa.com, and also to sign up for the Community Death Care Ottawa newsletter. Any events we have are advertised in their newsletter as well. So on our website, you can see that map, both the maps I showed you, I believe. And so we're also always looking for people to join our group. Thank you. I think that's it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nancy. Those maps are always amazing to see. It's a very passionate, small, and powerful group, and we're always looking for more help. We welcome questions either for Kelly and her presentation, but there are a few other members of Conservation Burial Ottawa here too that might come to the fore for any questions you might have.
I have a question that's just arisen as I'm listening to you talking. Kelly or anyone else, I would love to be cremated like one does in India on the edges of the Ganges River. How does the Indian cremation compare to our burials in terms of ecological status? Do you have any idea?
I think there's still an environmental cost for how much fuel would have to be burned to cremate a body. I think there's something about an open air pyre that speaks to some soul part of us,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure that it's environmentally advantageous, that there is still the consequence of, whenever we're burning something, there is an environmental impact.
Do you know if most people in India are cremated on a funeral pyre?
It is not the only means of disposition there. Some people are buried. I don't know enough about it to weigh in.
Okay.
Thanks, Catherine. There was a question with regard to Quebec, and do you want to just say a little bit about that, Kelly?
It's a challenge that we always face as Community Death Care Ottawa because we jockey the border between the two provinces. We have people on both sides that will come together for a presentation, but the rules are actually really different. So we have to flag the fact that in Ontario, we can, frankly, any part of Canada, and I think every state in the US, we can tend to our own dead, except for Quebec. Quebec really is an anomaly in this. You are required to use a funeral home. Shrouds are prohibited. That's a rule that was passed fairly recently, like in the last few years. I think what happened in Quebec is the funeral industry got out ahead of community death care. They were wise to what was going on. Some lobbying happened, and what was already somewhat restrictive became even more so. That's a piece of the work that's often required, is just the advocacy work reaching out to your counselor, your MP, and letting people know that you want this. I'll say too that advocacy, I mean, I feel Kaz's heartbreak, but you are a customer to the funeral homes and the cemeteries. If you want something more meaningful, go to them and say, this is what I want. Do it before you're dead, obviously. This is how some of the change is being made. I know with Kaz, we did part of community death care. Anna Maranta, she's a rabbi. We went to Pembroke 2 years ago and did a shrouding workshop. Within 2 weeks, I heard from funeral homes saying they had 3 people come in saying, I want a shroud burial. I heard about it at this workshop. And so the funeral homes were reaching out to say, what do we do? How do we do this? It is another way that we can create change. My dream is still that we're doing this for each other. But again, I realize that's not always going to be possible. I don't know a lot about the particularities in Quebec. Joe Hiscott, who is in Wakefield and is just a dream of a human, is kind of the local expert on what's happening in Quebec. They are doing some really remarkable work trying to restore this privilege and I would say birthright to the people of Quebec, this ability to care for each other. Yeah, you could come to Ontario. If you're in Ontario, you don't need to be a resident. We could just do this. Funeral homes can be your friend. We are not in an adversarial role. A lot of them really want to be in service. They want to be helpful. And again, in the same way that we are on this border, Tubman's would be an example. They have business locations on both sides of the river. And so Quebec residents, there are workarounds. I'll say too, there are, I mean, without naming names, good stuff is happening.
Just pulled yourself back at the last second there.
Good stuff is happening.
Get her 1-to-1. Any other questions that you might have? I just wonder if there was anything that was surprising on the presentation tonight, anything that you didn't know and now you do, and everything's changed. You can throw that into the chat anytime. I'd love to see that. Go
I'd
ahead.
like to recently, I'm viewing this information quite differently than I did the last time I learned something from Kelly, because in the meantime, I have learned about the high likelihood that we live many lives. Reincarnation is real. So I have lived already many lives before, and will have many more again. So what I do with this body, it's just one of hundreds. It doesn't really matter. I just throws it out because my whole thinking has suddenly recently changed because I've learned something new pertaining to death.
Thank you, Catherine.
I think if I could, Anne, go ahead. There are so many ways we could think about this. There are the legal requirements. There are the perhaps desires to protect the environment. Sometimes there's the desire to save money. There are all kinds of different avenues in. And absolutely tonight was intended to give you some information. It was one of the things we found out after our movie afternoon that people wanted to know the granular detail of what's going on. But I want to share with you part of what drives me. And I'm going to ask with a show of hands, and I know some of you have heard this question before, and I know what some of your answers will be. But with a show of hands, if you're still off camera, just do a little hand raise. But if I asked you right now to sing the song of your people, to sing for me the folk song of your people, put up your hand if you could do that right now. Yeah. So, what is death care? It is culture making. If we were a people who knew our songs, that would be part of our shared culture. That we just knew the food that we were going to eat when we came together, that we all knew who wove the textile that our shirt was made from. That would be part of our culture.
Yay.
We are an impoverished culture.
We are.
We are experiencing a great poverty in
We
this.
are.
And death is a place that we can start reweaving, bringing it back in, knowing how is it that we are with each other? Who are we?
Who are we?
Who are we as a people?
That's powerful.
Yeah.
There would have been a time that everyone would have had an answer to that question. And it probably wouldn't have been in the language I'm speaking now.
Yeah.
Oftentimes people that do still have a yes for that, it is not an English song they would sing.
Yeah.
There's no shame. There's no, that we have been wrong or bad or let our ancestors down.
Mm-mm.
But we can pick it back up. We can reclaim it. We can leave it for the ones to come. And we say this so often, death feeds life. That is literally a true thing. Our bodies can feed the earth, feed the microbes and the beetles and the roots of the trees, but it also feeds the people to come.
Yeah.
That they will start to know, who are we?
That we
What
won't
is our
start
song?
the same place.
So that is to give you a sense of why we do this. I want you to have meaningful choice for your death because it matters. If you've been in the world of birthing, a bad birth is a story that really sticks. You hear women that are still like, their kids are long grown, but that bad birth, that hard birth, and death is the same. A death that is not well tended stays as a wound in that family. So there are really practical pieces to this, and I'm a practical person. That's probably why I got the job of sharing that information with you. But that's not what drives me. And I want to invite all of you into this work of culture making.
Thank you. I didn't know this.
Well, that is the way we'll finish tonight because it's just too beautiful to continue. So we'll say a good night to you and hope that you'll be in touch with us, and we'll try to be in touch with you and keep carrying the possibility, will you? Thanks so much for coming tonight.
Mhm.